All right, so this morning Visti was teaching the calculations of Sudasha, Sri Lagna and Sudasha. This afternoon we're going to talk about how to interpret this dasha. So before we start, we want to chant a mantram or two. Those who know the mantra, I'm going to chant the Brihaspati Gayatri mantra. Those who know the mantra can chant along. Prishabham charshaninam vishvarupam adabhyam brihaspatim varenyam Vrishabham charshaninam vishvarupam adabhyam brihaspatim varenyam Vrishabham charshaninam vishvarupam adabhyam Brihaspatim Varenyam. Om Vishnave Namah, Om Vishnave Namah, Om Vishnave Namah. I think it was a good idea to invoke the blessings of Brihaspati now that Jupiter has just crossed over into the first Navamsa of Virgo, which happens to be his debilitation sign. So at such times then I'm giving the presentation. But so we invoke the blessings of Brihaspati as much as we can here.
Also, you'll be starting the year with your Jupiterian year with the blessings of Lakshmi. That's also
Perfect. Perfect. That's not a bad idea. And also it happens that the Lord of the 11th in my chart is in the very first degree of Virgo, so this should work well. Anyway. Now in Vedic literature, and particularly I'm quoting the Srimad Bhagavatam here, there are 4 classifications of bhagya that are given. Specifically the shloka reads something like Janmaishvarya Shutta Sri Bir Edhamanak Madak Puman. That in this material world, Janma, which is birth in a good or aristocratic family, as well as Aishvarya, which is the possession of wealth, income, other kinds of material opulence. Shruta, which is the benefit of having good education. And Shri B, which is the benefit of having beauty, physical health. These are the 4 classifications according to Srimad Bhagavatam of bhagya, or great boons or great benefits. And we know from all our discussions in Jyotish that the 5th and the 9th houses, being houses of Lakshmi, are the houses of Bhagya. So Lakshmi Devi is the one who blesses the person, blesses the native, with these 4 classifications of Bhagya, or benefits due to the good results of their prior karmas. Now, Goddess Lakshmi appears in various forms, and we saw a couple of forms already. Put one up. You can see what Goddess Lakshmi looks like. And after looking at a picture of Goddess Lakshmi, let me know if you think that this would be the right person to receive blessings from. I think so. What's very interesting, she's holding a rose. Is that a rose or a lotus flower? That's a lotus flower in the right hand. That's her vahana, or her vehicle.
This is a very particular form of Lakshmi. You see, she's seated on a conch shell. And you see the gada she has there?
The club, right?
Club, yeah. Very particular form.
That gold thing is a gada?
Yeah, it's a weapon.
It's a weapon.
Yes. She, when Vishnu rests, she takes it and holds it for him.
Uh-huh.
Sorry? We've never seen her use it, but there's always an evil or dark form of each deity.
Yeah.
What is the weapon called?
Yeah, with the club, you see Vishnu is typically seen using these weapons like the chakra and the gada. The chakra is a disc, a razor disc that he'll dispatch at somebody to cut off their head and so forth. These aren't normally the activities of Lakshmi. let's just say, as Vishti said, that she will hold these weapons for Lord Vishnu Narayana, who is her consort. Okay. So everywhere in Vedic, in the Vedic system of deification, there is the god and the goddess. Lakshmi happens to be. That's a beautiful picture. She happens to be the consort of Vishnu. And now you see Lord Mahavishnu lying on the Karna ocean, and she is attending him by massaging his feet and so forth. Now, specifically, Lakshmi blesses the person with power and position as Raja Lakshmi, so this is possible. It may be a little bit controversial to use the Sudasha to time power and position, but nevertheless, I'm going to attempt it today. After all, Lakshmi is Raja Lakshmi, Raja meaning royalty, the Raja Lakshmi Yoga being the conjunction of the Ascendant Lord and the Lord of the ninth house. As Dhana Lakshmi, she is the giver of wealth. As Santana Lakshmi, she is the bestower of progeny. As Vahana Lakshmi, she gives vehicles and nice things to ride on or ride in or to decorate the house with. As Moksha Lakshmi, she can bless the native with liberation. So now what we're doing here with Sudasha is timing the periods throughout life when the blessings of Lakshmi should come and in what areas of life they should come. So the standard definitions of Raja Yogas and Dhana Yogas you can get from most classical literatures. What we're listing here are some rather unique combinations that are mentioned by Jaimini and Jaimini Sutram, and which we can apply almost verbatim. You'll see in these chart illustrations that we have that some of the sutras, some of the definitions of yoga, especially Dhana yogas, coming by way of Jaimini Sutram, apply verbatim in charts, and the charts we're going to show indicate this. Now, first of all, the Sri Lagna. With regard to Sri Lagna and also with regard to a specific classification of Dhana yogas, which we call Srimanta Yoga, the shloka goes something like, Tasmin uche niche va Srimanta. Actually, there's a few more words in between, but that's the gist of it. No?
That's right.
As it is? Tasmin uche niche va Srimanta. That means that if there are planets in exaltation or planets in debilitation, they bless the native with wealth. And a little bit later, we're going to put up the chart of one of the most revered American heroes, at least from the male gender anyway, i.e. Hugh Hefner.
Envy you.
Depending on your orientation, right? We won't go into that. But so we're going to show how that particular shloka applies in his case verbatim. Anyway, it's all very interesting. We're going to have a good time with that today. What's that?
Do you want to see the chart now?
No. We'll save that for later. Okay. So Sri Lagna. Now, if the Lord of the Sri Lagna is either exalted or debilitated, and Vishti has very succinctly and carefully taught us how to calculate Sri Lagna today. So we won't go into calculations from here on. Let's just say that the Sri Lagna is the place of Lakshmi Devi in the horoscope. We can define wealth or absence of it in the person's chart just simply from Sri Lagna alone. What then to speak of other Dhana yogas? The counterpart to Dhana yogas are Daridra yogas, which are yogas for poverty. We're going to show yogas for wealth today in the charts of some extraordinarily wealthy persons and how Sri Lagna played the role, how Lakshmi played the role. Anyway, the first point is that if the Lord of the Sri Lagna is either debilitated or exalted, and especially if such planets aspect the Sri Lagna, then wealth is guaranteed for the person. And in the case of Scorpio and Aquarius, both lords may be taken into consideration. Now, Wealth occurs during the Sudasha periods which aspect the Sri Lagna or which has some kind of sambandha with the Sri Lagna. This is a very important point to understand. Dana yogas may apply in the chart, but if there's no relationship between the Sudasha and the Sri Lagna, then the effects of Dana yogas may not happen. Does everybody here understand what I mean by Dana yoga? A typical Dana yoga involves the lords of the Dharma houses, 1, 5, and 9, and the houses of wealth, 2 and 11. And so interrelationship between all these lords are going to create wealth, i.e. Dana yoga. Now there's some special Dana yogas we're going to talk about shortly here, but that's the gist of it. Now if those Dana yogas combined with the Sri Lagna, and if those Dana yoga planets and the Sri Lagna combined with the Sudasha operative, then the person is going to have one of those, the sky opens up and $100 bills are raining in, right? You'd be smoking long green Cuban cigars then. Sorry, okay with you. So, these combinations become especially powerful if the Sudasha sign and the Sri Lagna are in Kendras or Trikonas from the ascendant. That's a given. The Kendras are the houses of Vishnu. The Trikonas are the houses of Lakshmi. So naturally, Lakshmi likes to go to Vishnu's house, and Vishnu likes to go to Lakshmi's house, right? So when all these dashas involve the Kendras or Trikonas, then you know it's going to be especially powerful if the above-mentioned Dana yogas are being invoked at the time.
Is it Sri Lanka and then Lord? Sri Lanka Lord?
Yes. Well, if you can get the Lord and if you can get the Lord of Sri Lagna and Sri Lagna itself involved with Kendras and Trikonas, as well as the Sudasha sign, then this is a very powerful period through which to receive the blessings of Lakshmi. Now, one point I want to bear in mind here is that even if you never had any Dana yogas in your chart, and you never even had a chart, that is, nobody knew your birth data, these blessings are basically independent, right? Well, it's very difficult. There's a point at which you cannot quantify the blessings of God. All right, how can we measure this? At least we have a set of tools or a set of models, right, within Jyotish, that this becomes at the very least marginally possible. And we can replicate the results, you see. But beyond that, take some poor person. When was the last, sometimes you see that some very poor person, a homeless person, for example, with no money, without any cars, houses, nothing, suddenly becomes a millionaire. This happens. So what I'm saying here is that even though this is a class talking about how to judge the results of Sri Lagna and Sudasa, Lakshmi Devi can bless whoever she wants, you see. So keep that in mind next time you start doing things that are a little bit, contrary to proper behavior. Lakshmi Devi kind of behaves like Santa Claus in that way. So, now let's look at some specific yogas as per Jaimini Sutra. Raj Yoga. And again, I want to re-emphasize here. Yesterday, I think it was the day before, I mentioned to Sanjay that I was going to show some results of Raja Yoga with Sudasha, that is, people rising to a position of power. And he said, no, don't do that. I mean, this is only for wealth and childbirth and marriage, right? Normally, that's the case. Anyway, it's a good thing that Sanjay isn't here today, because I'm going to show, nevertheless, how Sri Lagna and Sudasha is going to time periods when people become elected to presidencies, for example, or they become governors of states and so on.
Usually the level of luxury increases when you rise to such a position. And Lakshmi will show, Sudasa will show that from a different angle.
Right. So that's a different way to quantify this. If a person becomes a king, naturally wealth is going to follow, you see. And if a person becomes the President of the United States, you bet wealth is going to follow very quickly thereafter. Heck, you have every big corporation in the world, sending their lobbyists, to Congress, on behalf of the new ruler. You see. Absolutely. To see how much Lakshmi Bill Clinton is blessed with these days. Okay, so going down the list here, when the Admakaraka and the Pitrikaraka, this is described in the chapter 3 of Jaimini Sutram, conjoin, or when there is a conjunction of the lords of the fifth and the first houses, a Raj Yoga occurs. Now here's the interesting part. If these planets are exalted or debilitated, so much more the case. Or if they're aspected by benefics, so much more the case. Or if they occupy or aspect the Navamsa Lagna, so much more the case. So keep that as a side note. The Navamsa Lagna may be used to quantify the magnitude of these yogas. If the planets are exalted or debilitated. Does everybody have this handout? It's on page 2 of the handout. On bullet number 2 on the bottom of the page. Anyway, if these planets are exalted or debilitated, conjoining or aspecting Navamsa Lagna, and or aspected by benefics, then a Maharaj Yoga obtains, namely a greatly powerful Raj Yoga. Moon and Venus simply conjoining in any sign cause Raj Yoga. Moon in the 7th house occupying a strong sign and aspected by benefics causes Raj Yoga. And that you'll find is the case in John Kerry's chart. Or if the 2nd or the 7th houses are aspected by benefics, Raj Yoga occurs. Similarly, if the lords of the 1st, 7th, and 9th houses mutually conjoin or aspect, then Raj Yoga conjoins. Now, in Jaimini Sutra, there are a lot of Raj Yogas that are mentioned that I'm not mentioning here. There are too many of them to mention. The reason why I'm mentioning these ones is because I have charts to demonstrate them in very clear terms. So it's nice to read the shloka and then see charts that replicate, what is being taught. And similarly, you can read down the list and you can see how other Raj Yogas form. Now, the combinations for wealth are especially important when we're looking at Sudasha and Sri Lagna. Now, the sloka that I quoted before, it goes, Tasmin uche niche va Srimantaha. Uche means exaltation. Nicha means debilitation. If the lords of the Srimanta Lagna are debilitated or exalted, and especially when they aspect the Sri Lagna, then there's a combination for wealth, i.e. the person becomes Srimanta. Srimanta. This means a greatly fortunate person. Now, here's a very important one. If the 2nd lord is in the 1st or 7th houses, and if it is either exalted or debilitated, then a Dana Yoga exists. So you're talking about the 2nd lord involved with the Lagna, debilitated or exalted. Or the 2nd lord can be in the 7th house and be exalted or debilitated. Or the 2nd lord could be in the 1st or 7th house with exalted or debilitated planets. The main thing is that there's a connection between the 2nd lord or 2nd house and the Lagna and exalted or debilitated planets. All right, did everybody get this? Yeah.
What's the logic behind debilitation?
Visty answer.
There are 2 ways to get lots of money. Either you make somebody extremely happy and they donate all their wealth to you, or you go in and scare them and threaten them, and they give all their wealth to you. There's this example that Sanjay gave where the Indian soldiers had a small, basically a small league or a match as such. And where the prize was a large amount of whiskey across the enemy border. Basically quite some part inland in Pakistan. So the idea was that what you call regiment or whatever, not a regiment, that would be too big. But that those soldiers who came first would get all that whiskey. So now there's something clever behind this. Now what happened was that these soldiers would storm into the country across the borders to get into this village, only to get this big pile of whiskey. And so when they came running through with all their might, little guns and all that, little backup, the villagers, seeing this, they became extremely frightened.
They became frightened.
And as a result, they started throwing all their gold and jewelry out the window for the soldiers to pick up and leave them alone, because they thought the soldiers came to attack the village. And the soldiers, they ran straight through, though some being knocked over by gold and jewelry flying from the windows. And but did you see how those villagers, in fear, let go of all their money and possessions? Similarly, a debilitated planet can do that. Just like we had recently, a lot of sales of protection for gas masks and all that in the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
Due to the fear of terrorism.
Fear of terrorism, right? And people are selling gas masks. Also, at places like Costco, they're selling, terrorist survival kits involving all kinds of weird stuff like, radios and headphones and stuff. Bill Maher said, "Why would I want a radio? So I can turn on the radio and listen to Rush Limbaugh tell me it was all Clinton's fault." Anyway, but that's very similar to the principle of Raj Yoga, formed in the normal ways, and Raj Yoga formed according to Viparit. Right? Viparit Raj Yoga forms when the 8th Lord and the 12th Lord and the 6th Lord all join together, meaning the person is becoming wealthy based on somebody else's disaster or somebody else's suffering, like doctors and surgeons and so forth. So anyway, that was a pretty interesting story, too.
So this is a weak thing of debilitated.
Well, that isn't particularly a Viparit Yoga, but the principle of how it forms Dana Yoga is similar. So you're talking about the second house or second lord involving the Lagna, either exalted or debilitated.
When you're talking about these aspects, are you only talking about the Graha Drishti and not the Rasa Drishti right now?
We're talking about Graha Drishti right now, but it can be Rashi Drishti also. Actually, if it's Rashi Drishti, it's even stronger. It's even stronger with Rashi Drishti. It means the person has come into this life with this fortune. It's simply a matter of time when the person will, receive benefits. There's like one of these yogas that I didn't mention, although it's written on here, is that Raj Yoga occurs when there are equal number of planets in the 2nd and the 4th houses, according to Jaimini.